Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Pokémon Film Perspectives. And today we're going to be discussing the 23rd animated film to be released as part of the Pokémon franchise, Mewtwo Strikes Back, Evolution. And yeah, as I said last week, and as the title of the film implies, this is a remake of the very first Pokémon movie. Now when I first heard about this movie, I didn't really know what to feel about it. On the one hand, I thought it was really damn cool that they were remaking the very first Pokemon movie in CGI, because, well, that was the whole gimmick of this movie. It was a 3D remake of the first Pokemon movie. At the same time, though, I kind of was wondering what they would do with it. Like, when I first heard about it, it just kind of felt like it was one of those superfluous things. I mean, we had already gotten the films rebooted with the most recent one, so for their next film to basically just be a full-on remake, it felt like it was just sort of bonus material, so to speak. Although, from what I can gather, this was meant to be like a celebration of one of Pokemon's anniversary. So honestly, I didn't really know how to feel about it. But with that said, it wasn't like I was against this either. It's just that by virtue of it being a remake, I was kind of cautious of it. When it comes down to remakes, remasters, and so forth, I go in with a grain of salt. Mostly because I'm not that huge a fan of owning multiple copies of what's essentially the same product. Now, it's not to say I haven't done that before, believe it or not. If I can find the right justification, I will buy the same product multiple times, and yes, I'm aware that probably makes me a massive hypocrite. But when it comes down to films especially, there has to be a very big reason why I would want to own multiple copies of the same movie. And sadly, when I heard about this film, I just thought, okay, it's a CGI remake of the first Pokemon movie. Why should that grab my attention? Well, ultimately, when it came down to listing all of the Pokemon films, this one was included in there, so I did decide to give it a shot. And quite frankly, from what I could hear about it, it did have enough in there that it was at least you could differentiate it from the original Pokemon movie beyond just 3D animation. With that said, do I think it holds up? Well, let's take a look at it and find out. And I'm just going to say this right now. Since this film is a remake of the first Pokemon movie, the plot for this one and that movie are pretty much the same thing. Not note to note the same, but they're close enough. It's kind of like what they did with Pokemon Black, Pokemon White, Victini, Reshiram, Victini, and Zekrom. Only whereas those films are basically just carbon copies of each other with only minor differences, this one just kind of follows the blueprint of the original plot with some updates here and there. But with this in mind, I'm going to actually forego my regular long-ass plot summary with these videos, because odds are, if you're watching this video, then you are at least somewhat familiar with Mewtwo Strikes Back. Either you watched the film, you watched my vlog, I don't know. Either way, you most likely are at least somewhat familiar with Mewtwo Strikes Back, and like I said, for the most part, the plots are the same between films. Mewtwo is a super clone of this cute little bugger, and basically ends up blowing up the lab he was created in, works from Giovanni. Giovanni acts like a jackass. Mewtwo says, screw you, and blows up his gym, decides to wage war with humanity, ends up rebuilds the lab that created him on New Island, calls a bunch of trainers there, including Ash and Co. He creates a storm to test them, they all arrive, he fights them with his clone Pokemon, steals their Pokemon to create clones and regular Pokemon fight, eventually everyone realizes that this is a bad idea. Ash almost dies. All the Pokemon revive him with their tears. Mewtwo realizes that, hey, maybe I'm a jackass. And then as he takes his clone Pokemon, leaves, and everyone's memories of the entire event are wiped from existence. So there you go. Same plot for both of them. But like I said, there are differences between this film and that film in terms of structure. Now, the most obvious differences right off the gate, well, like I said, the animation. The CG animation for this film is, honest to God, just really damn impressive. Every single shot in this movie looks fucking gorgeous. And I gave a similar compliment to the original Mewtwo Strikes Back, as that film really knew how to combine digital backgrounds with hand-drawn backgrounds and so on and so forth. And I thought that film was able to blend them perfectly into made a rather gorgeous movie. But the thing is, the CG animation is kind of in a different league, as it allows for a lot more creative designs and sets and backgrounds, as they all feel very intricate, all very profound. You can the water and the water that you see in the surrounding New Island looks very real. The textures all look so impressive to look at. All the characters. Okay, I will admit this. The characters do take some getting used to. It does look. It basically just looks like they took some of the standees and figures from the original Pokemon line and basically got them to move. And I will also give some shit to this remake for one thing: the lip syncing. So now, obviously, with 2D animation, it's easier to sync up lips because the lip animations are rather simple in 2D animation. For 3D, however, they're more intricate. So while they did obviously have to dub the movie in order to get it into English, well, they didn't change the lip flaps, for obvious reasons, of course, but still. But as such, it does lead to some line deliveries looking a bit weird, as what the characters are saying does not match with what their mouths are doing. Sorry, Chindy came in. So that is a little hard to get used to, but even they look impressive in my opinion, as they do genuinely, as when you do get used to them, I think they look and feel rather well. The designs for their clothes look really damn impressive. Their models look really damn impressive. They animate rather well. They're very fluid. They're very fluid to look at. It's honestly just a fucking gorgeous movie. Now, with that said, if you want me to compare and contrast and say which looks better, the original movie or the remake, well, I like both, quite frankly, for different reasons, mind you. But I think both look really damn impressive. Both use the animation styles they were given to their full advantage and create, in my opinion, two very gorgeous movies. It's just they're gorgeous in two different ways. So I don't think one is superior to the other. It's just ultimately whichever one you prefer. And going back to voice lines and dubbing, that's the obvious second difference between this film and the original Mewtwo Strikes Back. The original Mewtwo Strikes Back was dubbed by 4Kids, so obviously the cast for that film was the 4Kids actors. However, since this film was made during the Pikachu Project era of Pokemon, obviously the actors are all the ones from the Pikachu Project. And again, you get used to it. You get used to it because I've been familiar with the latest voice of Ash for years. So hearing that voice come out of basically OG series Ash's mouth, it's not as distracting as you think it would be. Maybe if you're a diehard purist, maybe, but otherwise I can take it. Although the ones that I think are that take a little getting used to are Misty's voice and to a lesser degree Brock. I say Brock to a lesser degree because just as Ash had his voice changed with the swap over from 4Kids to the Pikachu Project, so too is Brock. So they obviously brought his actor back to play Brock in this movie. Misty's, however, I can say that her actor is trying to match the inflections from the original. In fact, I'll give that as another compliment to this movie. Many of the characters in this film do their best to try and match the inflections of the dub actors from the original Mewtwo Strikes Back. And for the most part, they do hit the chord rather well. Like the voice they gave the Harbor Master from Mewtwo Strikes Back is basically almost note for note the same as the Harbor Master from the original. So I'll say that. I think that they are doing their best. And the actress that plays Misty is no exception. But with that said, I don't think she matches I don't think she matches the inflection of the original as well. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just it's very different, is what I'm saying. And you could argue the same thing with Ash and Brock. But again, considering that we've seen them dubbed so many times, I think you can get used to it. Although in the case of Misty, she did appear in the Pikachu Project era of the anime, as I think at the end of the advanced era of the anime, she did come back for like one episode. But don't quote me on that. So I don't know. Again, it really only matters if you're used to the original voices. You get used to them for the most part, but overall, I think it's fine. Again, that's another difference. For the most part, though, they do try to stay true to the original in plenty of other regards. Like going back, like I said, they do still the dub actors for this version do their best to try and emulate the dub actors from the original Mewtwo Strikes Back. They even try and keep a lot of the same puns and jokes from the original Pokemon intact. Case in point, when Ash, Brock, and Misty all arrive at Mewtwo's palace on New Island and encounter Jack, Joe, and Jill, and yes, they still don't have a name in this version, so I'm gonna keep calling them Jack, Joe, and Jill. Guess what? Brock starts trying to put the moves on Jill, as he is wont to do, and during during his whole flirting session, he actually talks about how he could make her some of his famous jelly donuts, which is of course a famous dub line from the original anime, where they took a rice ball and Brock said it was a jelly donut. So I like stuff like that. And kind of going off of that, there are some lines from the original Mewtwo Strikes Back that they just keep because they're so iconic. Case in point, they kept Mewtwo saying that Ash's Charizard was poorly trained, which is nice. They kept Ash's "you can't get away with that, I won't let you," when he emerges with a free Pokemon that Mewtwo captured. And likewise, a lot of Mewtwo's speech in the third act of the movie is basically ripped straight out of the original Mewtwo Strikes Back. Which works to the film's benefit and detriment, which I'll get to. But overall, I do like that they are trying to pay respects. But the thing is, there is one thing about this movie, one very big thing that I think makes it a much better film in comparison to the original Mewtwo Strikes Back. Now, I'm not saying this to demean the original Mewtwo Strikes Back. I, of course, have gone on record and said that I do enjoy that movie, warts and all. With that said, the warts are very obvious with that movie, and while I will enjoy it, I cannot go on record and say that it is a good movie. So how does Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution improve on that? It does the one thing that the original tried not to do. Give Mewtwo nuance. So, one of the major flaws in Mewtwo Strikes Back was Mewtwo as a character. Now, as I said in the original vlog, Mewtwo did still have his share of badass moments in the original movie. And even rewatching it for that vlog, I thought to myself, this guy still does plenty of awesome shit. And that is true even for even for the Evolution remake. Mewtwo is still a very intimidating fucker, and he definitely gives the air of, you don't want to cross this guy. But one of the faults I gave him was his character. It was very cookie-cutter, two-dimensional, just not that interesting of a villain. He basically just damned humanity just cause he hated Pokemon because they're inferior, because he thought they were subservient to people, and he basically said that my clones are stronger, so they'll repopulate the earth, blah bitty blah bitty blah. It wasn't very good. It was very poor motivation from Mewtwo, and it made for, honestly, a not that interesting character. The Evolution remake, on the other hand, keeps the nuance with his character. Now, again, that brings me to another fault in the original. One of the faults that I went on a rant on in my original vlog was how the overall message of Mewtwo Strikes Back was that fighting was wrong. No shit! Which still felt like a very hypocritical message coming from the franchise about tiny creatures fighting each other for the amusement of others. What this movie, however, does is that it brings back the one thing about Mewtwo's character that the 4Kids dub tried to remove because they thought that kids couldn't get it. The reason for why he was fighting. So, the crux of Mewtwo's character in this entire movie, the thing that compels him to do every act that he does here, both good and heinous, he's fighting to prove that he's a real boy. That is the crux of Mewtwo's character. So, from the outset, when Mewtwo was created in this movie, he was a curious little bugger. And that's also another difference between this movie and the original. The lab that Mewtwo wakes up in is a lot nicer in the remake than it is in the original. In the original, the lab was like this dark, ominous place with all the scientists just hidden in shadow. In this movie, it's bright, colorful, you can clearly see everyone's face, and they're all trying to be as friendly as possible. But the thing is, in the original English dub, Mewtwo went nuts because he thought that he was considered just a science experiment and didn't want to be exploited. But the thing that causes this freak out in this movie is that he begins asking questions about where he came from. And of course, the lead scientist does his best to try and answer those questions, telling Mewtwo, you're a clone of Mew, you came from a fossil that we found, you're a super clone, you're stronger, you were made in this lab. And when Mewtwo begins learning that he was artificially created, that he was made in this lab and wasn't actually born in the traditional sense, he kind of begins freaking out. Because if he was artificially created, that means he must have been created for some reason, right? Well, what was the reason? Why was he made? What is his purpose for existing? Nobody answers that question. Because after the lead scientist tells them, we created you in this lab, all the scientists do what they did in the original and start patting themselves on the back for a job well done, while Mewtwo's over here in the background wondering, what the fuck's going on? Who am I? Where am I? What am I supposed to be doing? Why did you create me? What's going on? And that freak out is what leads to the lab blowing up, because Mewtwo's kind of having a panic attack right now, and he's taking it out of the nearest living things. In this case, the lab and the scientists. That is the crux of it. Well, that's the crux. And when the lab blows up, Mewtwo's dialogue is much different from the original. In the original, when Mewtwo destroyed the lab, it was very clearly a deliberate act because he was basically boasting that, look at me, I'm the world's most powerful Pokemon. In this movie, however, he's actually shocked by what he did. Like, is this my power? Am I the world's most powerful Pokemon? Like, he genuinely, yeah, he broke all their shit, but he didn't mean for it to get this bad. So clearly, there is there's a bit more nuance there. And then that's where Giovanni comes in. Like the original, Giovanni offers Mewtwo a chance to go with him because he wants to give him purpose. But the difference is, in the original movie, Mewtwo went with him because he thought, oh, we'll be partners, and we'll be partners. He's going to help me refine my power. And to a degree, that's kind of what it's like in the remake. But in the remake, it's made clear that Mewtwo only goes with Giovanni because he's looking for answers still. Because all the questions that keep running through Mewtwo's head in this version are him constantly asking, who am I? Where am I? He's trying to find a purpose, a reason for existing. And even as he's working with Giovanni, he doesn't know if this is why he existed. He's just thinking, is this why I was created? To fight for this guy? Was I created to be this weapon? He still doesn't know what he wants to be. And the thing is, him knowing that he's a clone Pokemon constantly has him questioning what he truly is. And unfortunately, Giovanni doesn't help in the matter. Now, in the original movie, it's been shown that part of the reason why Mewtwo was doing all the heinous stuff he does was because he had a superiority complex because he was supposed to be a super clone. However, in this movie, the fact that he's a clone actually leads to the opposite. He has an inferiority complex. And the reason for why he has that inferiority complex is because of Giovanni. Because while he was working under Giovanni drilled into him that his sole reason for existing is the same thing that all humans want. Control, war, destruction, that only the strong shall survive while the weak are crushed underfoot. And while Mewtwo is questioning all of these things and questioning what his purpose is in Giovanni's whole grand scheme or whatever, it's clear that he begins internalizing the lessons. And combined with his already confused identity crisis where he's beginning to wonder his own existence, well, let's go. Remember how that Giovanni and Mewtwo broke up because Giovanni told Mewtwo that he's a Pokemon and Pokemon live to serve humans? Well, going back to Giovanni saying that only the strong will survive and the weak had to basically step aside. Well, Mewtwo thinks he's inferior because he's a clone. He's an artificially created Pokemon. He sees himself as other. So combined with what Giovanni kept saying about how the strong need to survive and weak need to be crushed underfoot, Mewtwo starts believing himself to be weaker just by virtue of his origin. That he's not a real Pokemon. He even says that when Giovanni tells him that he is supposed to serve him because he's a Pokemon. He says, "Yeah, humans created me, but I'm not human, and I'm an artificial Pokemon, so I'm not a Pokemon either." Mewtwo basically sees himself as the other, as something that shouldn't exist, something that was never meant to exist, and he feels that he himself is weaker. And so what leads to him freaking out and blowing up Giovanni's shit isn't because he's sick of Giovanni's crap. That's part of it, but that's not the big reason. The big reason is because Mewtwo genuinely believes that he is weaker, and he doesn't want to accept that. And as a result, when Mewtwo goes back to New Island, he outright states that he hates his creation, which translates to he hates himself. He hates that he's an artificially created Pokemon. And from here on out, every single action he takes in the rest of the movie is him trying to justify his existence, trying to tell himself, no, I'm not weak. I do deserve to exist, and I will prove it. And that's why he actually wants to exact vengeance on humanity. He doesn't want to exact vengeance because he thinks that humans are dicks. He wants to exact vengeance because he hates himself. Humans made him. And so he basically is like, you made me, so I'm striking back at you, which is where the title Mewtwo Strikes Back comes from, which is another difference between this film and that film. There's actual justification for the title Mewtwo Strikes Back. And as such, the rest of the film constantly showcases why Mewtwo's struggle to try and be a person, to actually try and be who he is. Yeah, he still looks down on humans, but it's not because he thinks that humans are exploitive and jackasses. He looks down on humans because he thinks they are weaker because he thinks they're weaker. And okay, yeah, you could argue that there's still some bits of exploitation in there, as obviously he doesn't have a favorable opinion of Giovanni, and when he talks about how he once worked with humans, he said the experience was disappointing. But again, going back to Giovanni's whole strong survive thing, that they could the whole argument there is that he saw humans as inferior, and going back to how he feels himself as the other and is trying to justify his existence, he sees humanity's attempt to control him as just another thing holding him back, and he doesn't want to accept that. He hates humanity because he hates himself, and which in turn is why he goes to creating clone Pokemon. He argues that the reason why he wants to create clone Pokemon is because regular Pokemon let humanity be the top dog in the world, and since he already doesn't like humanity because he's projecting all of his self-loathing onto them, he basically his hatred of Pokemon is the extension, which is where his clone Pokemon come in, as it's basically him trying to justify his plans. But you could also argue he's doing it because he doesn't want to be alone. He is a clone Pokemon who hates his existence. He's just trying to prove that he is strong. And he wants to prove that he has the right to exist. And creating clone Pokemon and have them fight by his side, it's like he's trying to create a family. People that can stand by him. And if he can prove that these clones and himself are strong, then that can prove they have the right to exist. That they do not deserve to be tucked aside and just ignored. That they can make their own purposes. And I like that. I actually do genuinely like that, as it creates a lot more nuance from Mewtwo than just some asshole who hates humans. And that in turn is what actually makes the conflict with Mewtwo in the climax of the film that much better. Because in the original film, Mewtwo fought Mew because he wanted to prove that he was stronger because he was a super clone. And you could argue that's a similar case here. But the underlying reason for both fights is different. In the original movie, the fight broke out because Mewtwo wanted to prove he was stronger, and he genuinely believed it. In this cut of the movie, however, it's all talk. Mewtwo wants to defeat Mew because this is like the ultimate test for him. If he can prove that he is stronger than Mew, then that can prove that he has the right to exist. That can prove that he isn't just some lab experiment that was grown in a tube just for the amusement of someone else. If Mew's gone, he can be a real boy, basically. And honestly, I like that. Essentially, it changes the reason of I'm better than you because I'm a clone to I'm a clone, but I'm a clone, but that doesn't mean I'm weaker than you. And I love that. And that's part of why Mewtwo and what makes the final fight in the movie between the original Pokemon and the clones that Mewtwo created hurt that much more, because this is more than just proving he's superior. This is Mewtwo trying to prove that they do deserve to exist because they're stronger. And that goes back to what Giovanni put in his head when they were partners. That twisted mindset, and it's fucked up. But and of course that leads to the more nuanced moral for the movie, namely that everybody has the right to exist. Everyone's still horrified by all the fighting between all the Pokemon, and what I love is that they did actually change the line of Mewtwo suppressing the Pokemon's special abilities with his psychic powers to my Pokemon don't need special moves to beat yours, and they just six his clones on the originals. So honestly, I'm okay with that. Some people may probably argue that's a downgrade, but I'm honestly fine with that. It was kind of a dumb line in the original anyway. But the thing is, like I said, since the moral of this film is that everyone deserves to exist regardless of how or where they were born, it makes the fighting that much sadder, because essentially they're fighting for nothing. This isn't a battle between two trainers trying to test their strength. This is a battle of who has the right to exist, and it's brutal, it's angry, it's cold, it is just hard to watch. Just seeing these Pokemon not use any of their flashy moves, just go bare knuckle duster, slashing and fighting each other, it makes it harder to watch, because everyone's basically like, why are they fighting over this? They don't need to fight over this. They all exist, and they all deserve to live. And so that's what makes this climax that much more emotional in this movie, because they actually kept in the reasoning. And I think it's a very mature reasoning, which, guess what? I think kids can take. I feel like kids do need to learn this lesson, because, quite frankly, there are some jackasses out there who will think that people do deserve to be treated lesser because of where or how they were born, what nationality they belong to, what race they're a part of. There are people out there who genuinely think that just because you were born or look different, you deserve to be shamed and shunned. So to have a message pretty much saying it doesn't matter how or where you were born, you deserve the right to exist, I think is something that kids could very much take. And if it makes them cry a little, good. Kids need to be challenged like that. Kids need to feel those emotions, because it allows them to better process them and be able to actually properly express them when they need to. And so having a message like that not only teaches them a good lesson, but it's good for developing a child's mind. My point is, there was a good idea to keep this lesson in, and it was still stupid, and they cut it out of the original. Okay? I'm not gonna get over that. It was stupid. And that's the thing. And so seeing the message actually in full bloom, not just fighting is bad, but everyone has the right to exist, and fighting like this is pointless, is still a much better, much more nuanced message than the shit they were pulling in the original movie. And in turn actually makes Ash's sacrifice at the end have a lot more weight, because Ash is the one advocating for everybody to live. And he steps in the middle of the fight because he wants Mewtwo and Mew to stop, not just because they're killing each other, but because he wants them both to know that they don't need to fight over this. They can exist independently without having to try and prove that one is stronger than the other. And yeah, Mewtwo is still shocked by what Ash did, still calling him a fool, but he's like, what? A human's trying to stop us? Why? But in turn, what makes Mewtwo realize that he's in the wrong and that he needs to work on himself is when everybody sheds tears for Ash. And yeah, the whole Pokemon tears bringing Ash back thing is still dumb. It's not explained in this version either. They did not have this. Even the remake didn't have the scene of Mewtwo with the clone in the mental realm with all the other clones that died, so that's a thing. But at the very least, when Mewtwo sees all these clone Pokemon just mourning this one human that tried to stop the fighting, and then them all just kind of getting chummy with each other, despite the fact that both were created by a different means, he makes him realize there really isn't a difference between us, is there? And it actually gets encapsulated in a final line, which I'm going to look up right now, so pardon me for a second. The line is, "It is true. You and I," referring to you here, "are living beings. Pokémon." And it's the first time in the movie that Mewtwo officially claims that he is not an other. Now, of course, at several points in the movie, he still uses the name Pokémon. But the thing is, throughout the entire movie, every action that Mewtwo has taken has been to try and justify his existence as what he is, a clone artificial Pokemon. He sees himself as another, and every action he's taking is him trying to assert control over something that he feels he has no control over. And it's why, going back to how they changed some of the lines. In the original Mewtwo Strikes Back, when Mewtwo exposed and revealed himself to Ash and Co, and one of his first lines was, "I make the rules now." In this movie, he says, "I make my own rules." Which again goes back to him trying to gain control and justify that he has the right to exist, and nobody can tell him what he should or shouldn't be, that he deserves to exist. But by virtue of one of his last lines being that you and I are living beings, that we're both Pokemon, is finally him acknowledging that regardless of how he was born, there's no difference between him or Mew. They're both Pokemon, and both of them have the right to exist regardless of what happened. and of course it still leads to the message of it doesn't matter how, that it's what you do with your life that matters, not how you were created or how you came into existence. So that part is still there, and but at the same, which in turn I think actually does give more kudos to the line of him saying that I'm going to do it to learn something that you clearly know well, because Mewtwo having this revelation is not him becoming a good person. It's the start of him becoming a good person as he realizes, oh, I was in the wrong on this one. He decides that I need to go somewhere where I could actually internalize this and become a better person who doesn't blow shit up for funsies. So I think I do actually like that. And overall, I think I think the film does a much better job at implementing that message and actually treating the audience like they're not brain dead. I'm sorry, but that's a thing. But with that said, there is another problem that it comes from from trying to get the more nuanced take while still trying to pay tribute to the original Mewtwo Strikes Back. Now, I'm not going to go on record and say that them trying to emulate the original movie is a bad thing. That's not. In fact, it shows that there's actually some reverence to the original movie, and that they're not just trying to wipe the slate clean and tell a new story because some new jackass is in the director's seat. No, they actually are trying to pay tribute to the original in many ways, and it's shown in many circumstances. They keep lines from the original. They keep jokes from the original. They actually do go out of their way to try and emulate the original in certain regards by not only copying certain lines, but like I said, through actors' inflections, through quotable moments here and there. But for the most part, I think it works, except for the climax. For the climax, they did try to keep Mewtwo's speech note to note the same. Now, ultimately, the speech works in this version because, like I said, going back to how Mewtwo has an inferiority complex in this version, it makes sense why he would try to boast himself up, as it's not him trying to prove to Mew that he's powerful, it's him trying to kind of boost his own confidence and try and prove to himself that he's powerful. But at the same time, trying to keep a lot of the similar lines, or even try to emulate them in some regards, like with Mewtwo going fool when Ash gets in the way of Mew and Mewtwo's fight, or him creating the clones. I don't know, it feels a little out of place is what I'm saying. It doesn't distract the movie entirely, and Mewtwo's final speech I think is still a nice thing to end on, especially with the more nuanced take. It just feels like it belongs in a different kind of movie. But though at the same time you could argue because of the nuanced take it fits more fitting in this one than in that one. Since in that one Mewtwo suddenly deciding, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be an asshole, and that it's what one does with a gift of life that matters. Actually, it didn't make sense in that one, since the whole crux of the movie was biting bad and whatever. So I don't know. It feels a little distracting when they try and emulate quite a few lines from the original, only for it to kind of clash with the more accurate translation they're doing for this one. So yeah, I am gonna kind of consider that a problem. But even then, that's only but even then, that's not really a big problem. Although, if I can list any more differences, there are a few more things that are expanded on. Like, for example, in the original, Nurse Joy, I guess. In the original movie, Mewtwo said he kidnapped Nurse Joy because he needed her knowledge of Pokemon physiology for his grand plan, which was, taking over the world with clones or whatever. But since this version of Mewtwo isn't trying to take over the world with clones, he's basically just trying to create a family and basically wipe out humanity because he thinks they suck. Because he not because he thinks they suck, but because he hates himself and is internalizing that towards humanity, which he sees as his creators. Well, in this version, he basically said he kidnapped Nurse Joy because you just need a nurse. After all, Nurse Joy are in charge of Pokemon centers. Nurse Joy's job is to take care of Pokemon. Ergo, he just had Nurse Joy around because he needed a nurse, and since he's now ready to go forward to the next plan, he doesn't need a nurse anymore, so he lets her go. This is also one of the bigger changes in the movie that, oh boy, this one is the weirdest one. So let's talk about Team Rocket again. Yeah, they're still in this movie too. Why wouldn't they be? So how Ash and Co. got to New Island in the original was that Team Rocket dressed as Vikings and got them in a boat which they rowed across the sea. You want to know what they dress as in this version? They dress as singing sailors in a Lapras paddle boat. And it's weird. I cannot do it justice. Just seeing the Lapras boat come in, Jesse and James singing this weird song as they're synchronized, as being all synchronized, me coming up with Ash and Co. and talking like fucking pirates, with Meowth in the front trying to steer the thing, and then as they're all going through the ocean and Jesse and James are paddling, they have Meowth pretty much turn on the motor for this thing and it just starts blasting across the sea, and while Ash and Co. are freaking out, Jesse and James are in the back going, ha 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 ha, like, it's weird. I thought the Vikings were weird in Mewtwo Strikes Back, the original, but this one is, it's so weird. I don't know what's weirder. The Vikings or this? Maybe the Vikings, because that's so out of place. But seeing Jesse and James like this, I mean, it's in character. It's what they do best. But still, I'm confused. Very confused. Also, there was another change they made from... There was also another change they made from the original this one. Apparently, in the original Japanese dub, there were more trainers that tried to go to New Island beyond Jack, Jill, Joe, and Ash and friends. And this film actually does show them, as we do see at least 2 other trainers who do try to make their way to New Island. We don't see them again, with the implication being they didn't survive the journey, so... Yeah, I can kind of see why they cut that out of the original, because I would love to hear parents explain to their kids, oh yeah, those other 2 trainers are dead. That's gonna leave some mental scars, so it's a minor thing. It's a minor thing, I guess. It doesn't really matter if it was kept in the movie or not. I don't know, but basically, when it comes down to it, I think Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution as a film is good. Like, legitimately good. When it comes, like, I do have my own little complaints here and there about how the film was handled in a few areas, but when it comes down to it, I think as a remake, Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution is a damn good one. It pays enough tribute to the original Mewtwo Strikes Back that it doesn't feel like it's trying to just brush over everything that came before. But at the same time, it does try to take what didn't work in the original and improves upon it. It has a more accurate translation. It actually carries with it more nuance than the original did. It gives Mewtwo's character that much more depth because his conflict isn't that he thinks he's stronger than everyone else and he thinks humans are exploitive jackasses. The conflict comes from him trying to justify his existence and taking his anger out on his creators, i.e. humanity. And so that leads to a much more nuanced villain with much more in-depth motivation for why he's doing what he's doing beyond, grr, I'm an asshole. So it gives him much more to work with, which in turn leads to the moral carrying that much more weight and not just being a simple fighting bad message. I like that. I think it's a good message and it's implemented perfectly. So in that regard, yes, it pays enough tribute to the original Pokemon, the first movie, while still managing to improve upon what didn't work and actually make for a much more, in my opinion, emotionally satisfying movie. By the end of this film, I was not annoyed. I was not aggravated. I actually looked at what I was seeing and thought, yeah, I'm actually enjoying myself. And it wasn't just my inner Pokemon nostalgia fan kicking in there. It was me genuinely enjoying what I was watching. And I think it worked. And I think it worked for the most part. So when it comes down to it, I think that Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution isn't just enjoyable. I just think it's a good movie overall. I think it's just better handled. And if I have to compare this with the original Mewtwo Strikes Back, I think it wins. Even putting aside the better animation, which again, I'm not going to compare the animations between them, as I think the animation for the original and the remake are both amazing and beautiful, but for different reasons. What makes Evolution superior in my eyes is the writing, how they handle character, how they handle pacing, how they handle their themes. In this regard, Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution feels superior because when it comes down to it, it doesn't treat their audience like they're fucking 2-year-olds. They can understand what they're watching on screen, can internalize it, and it does make for a much more emotionally satisfying film to watch. So when it comes down to it, I'm not going to go and say that the original Mewtwo Strikes Back is not worth watching, because at this point, I think that film has more than established its street cred as a Pokemon movie. And if that movie didn't exist, then this remake wouldn't exist. So I cannot ignore that. But if you have to choose between which of these 2 movies you want to see, I would argue that Evolution has more merit to it, as it does actually feel like it takes what's given to it and actually does try to advance it. It doesn't treat the audience like they're dumb. It actually gives depth to its characters, and it has a much more satisfying emotional payoff than the 2D bullshit that we get, and the two-dimensional biting is bad bullshit that we got in the original movie. So, if you have to pick a film, if you had to pick between these two, I would go with this one. I would still say the first one has some merit to it, but between the two of these, while I enjoy both of them, Evolution is the superior film. I think it's just a hands down better. You're free to disagree with me on that, and like I said, the original Mewtwo Strikes Back I think is still worth watching if you're a Pokemon fan, but Evolution I think is just a much better film overall. If you want to jump down my throat about that, be my guest, but that is my opinion, and you're free to disagree with me, so I think that's really all I can say. I apologize for any blubbering that I did throughout the video, but I do hope you enjoyed this regardless, and, well, now that we've gotten this film out of the way, there's one more animated film we gotta look at before we move on to the live-action stuff. So next time we meet, we'll be seeing Pokemon's last animated foray, for now at least, as we take a look at Secrets of the Jungle.